Love it.
I have been waiting on this. Uh,
Ah,
let's get started. Let's get started because,
I
man,
love it.
all right,
Also,
let's,
obsessed with a Die Hard poster. We're already going to get along. I love it.
okay. Well, let's get into this. Before I start every podcast, I do this thing called the over the top intro because I am super grateful for anyone who's going to give me a little bit of their time, especially of a person of your magnitude. So let's just jump right into it. My next guest is the pride of the physics and math department at the University of Colorado Boulder. Go Buffs! She has a PhD in astrophysics, a writer, a speaker, a producer, a science advisor. She is the founder and CEO of Space Dime Productions. She is the Julia Child of science. She can be seen on Star Trek Prodigy season 2, technically heard in 1. Um, Currently on Netflix. Dr. Erin Macdonald, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. What an introduction. I love it.
I am so happy for you just for everything because Dr. Aaron, I don't know if you know this or not, you are a professional nerd. And coming from our world, you have represented our people so well. And it is okay. Let me break this down. As you can see, nerd-like qualities behind me. There's many around this room that the camera is not pointed to. But you got something every nerd wants, and that is the call. What the call is whatever your favorite thing is, you get that call, and now you get a chance to participate in your favorite thing. I thought I was going to get the call. Uh, I'm still waiting on mine, but you got yours for Star Trek. And how did that go? We'll circle back to everything else, but the call. I'm
Great.
very curious about the call.
The call, I love that you said that because that's exactly how I say it. When I'm telling the story, I'm like, and then I got the call. Like yeah, I was on Star Trek's radar because I was giving talks at conventions and they wanted me to come in for their official Star Trek conventions to give like physics of Star Trek talks. And then Michelle Paradise was coming on for season 3 of Discovery and they had kind of hit the reset button. They were going forward to the future. And I got a message that Michelle Paradise wanted to talk to me, and that was the call. And I know she talked to a lot of scientists. She was trying to find the right people. They had the idea for season 3, and they very much just needed a couple scientists to help them refine that idea and build a backbone of science behind that. So she was looking for the right people. I like to think that I did well because then, I kind of talked to CBS and it was like, I'm in Los Angeles. You have all these other Star Trek shows going on. I know my stuff. I know how to work with writers. Like, you should want a scientist to be the official one that touches them all, and they went for it. So yeah, that's been 5 years now. I've been working as the Star Trek scientist.
Well, before we jump into all things Star Trek, I was hoping you could kind of introduce yourself a little bit more because your career trajectory is, well, fun. If you could just tell us a little bit about your background.
That's a valid thing. It's been a long road, as one would say. I wanted to become a scientist because of Dana Scully and Dr. Ellie Arroway from the film Contact. I loved her. They were both cool women that I saw myself as and I wanted to be. So that put the bug in my brain to become a scientist. And I loved space. I think everyone fundamentally loves space. It's objectively cool, but I loved the idea that I could go to college and just study it and just study space and figure out how it works. And I loved that so much that I went through and I did my PhD, but I didn't have like a goal, if I was going to do anything, I was going to be at Starfleet Academy. And
Well,
that didn't
yeah.
exist. So I was like, what am I going to do? And I left academia, but I loved teaching. So I taught for a little bit at museums and community colleges, couldn't pay the bills. So I started working in aerospace engineering, but I missed teaching so desperately. And that's where I was talking about that I would go to conventions. I'm already a sci fi nerd. I love teaching. And I would go and give panels on like the physics behind Star Trek. Let's talk about warp drive. Let's talk about transporters, how these work, how they could work, how they don't work. And and that was a lot of just kind of refining science communication. And I did that for a number of years, moved out to Los Angeles, still working as an engineer, but now I'm closer to this industry that I love. I've
Okay.
met all these creatives in the industry by going to these conventions. And so I started working on a friends of a friend's pilot or someone else's show, just one-off jobs, paid or not, and just building my credentials and my network. And then that's how I kind of got into science advising. But I will say, I mean, if we're talking careers, I had a huge crisis when I got the Star Trek gig because it was very much a what do I do after this? Like, this is the job. This is the job. And so that's where I started looking at stuff and moving more into TV writing and realized that telling those stories is what I want to do.
Well, that was cool because you got a chance to combine your career and your passions or vice versa to make this thing. So I'm curious. Okay, maybe it is Star Trek, but I'm very curious. What is your all-time favorite science fiction film or series?
Uh, we'll assume a Star Trek is given.
Okay.
We'll,
Okay.
we'll just put that aside. Um, if we can expand into video games, my favorite sci-fi universe world is Mass Effect. That is
Okay.
like my jam. That I love it so deeply. I know all of the Mass Effect lore. I know those stories backwards and forwards. I
Yes.
play it once a year. Like I love Mass Effect. But I'm also Star Wars nerd. I'm also a Doctor Who nerd. I've got them all tattooed on my arm. I, um, yeah, in terms of like favorite, I mean, Firefly is probably a series I come back to all the time.
Why did that not go longer?
So
Sorry. That
good. It's so good.
it was
Yeah,
it was cut too short for
yeah.
all the wrong reasons. That should be going on now.
I know. They should have had 20 seasons, 5 movies. It
Yeah.
should be forever. Yeah, yeah. And then the 2004 Battlestar Galactica, that's another show that like it's great sci-fi. It's just great sci-fi. And
Oh,
yeah.
now I have to ask this question because I know you worked as a science advisor for Star Trek, but you also worked on other properties. For starters, what exactly is a science advisor?
That's great question. So typically, as someone is writing a TV show or a movie that has any sort of science in it, it crosses their mind, maybe I should do more than just Google the answer. Maybe I should call someone who knows this stuff. And that's usually how someone gets pulled in to be a quote unquote science advisor on a project. Now, sometimes it's a friend of a friend, who knows someone who has a project. It's not really a job that they advertise. You're not going to find science advising if you search for jobs. Um, but it is a job where, and I think this is where a lot of kind of confusion comes in, you have to love movies and television and stories. You are not going to be successful if you are a well actually person in movies because you're there to help the story. You're there to be a positive force and to help just enhance what these writers have already come up with, not to kill their darlings.
Right.
It's their story, it's their baby. I'm there to go, yes, and let's do this. Let's phrase it this way. Let's figure this out. And it's that really fun, creative problem solving. But I touch every point from like when they're coming up with ideas through the actual script writing to write certain lines or scenes, all the way through post production to work with like the VFX team or the motion graphics team to make sure what's on the screen makes sense. I have written out equations that have showed up on screen. So Stamets in Discovery has my handwriting because
Nice.
the graphics team just pulled my stuff and threw it on the screen, and I love it. So yeah, there's a lot of different aspects to it, but it can be a very big project or a very small project, just depending.
Okay, so I know you were the science advisor for Space Cadet on Amazon Prime. I just watched that not too long ago, actually. And one of the things about that, I saw this and then researched for this. I wanted to know who had the most accurate TV show? that you worked on where it was just like, yeah, this all checks out?
Um, are we like, okay, so that I've worked on?
Yeah,
So I think I'm glad you mentioned Space Cadet because I think it's a perfect example of science advising where you come in and you have to go, I get the tone of this story. This is fun. We are not here to be the Martian. We are here to tell a fun, character-driven story. And I am not going to nitpick an entire final act. I'm going to let them do what they're doing and
exactly.
just make sure that when experts are talking, they're saying the right things. But I think too, if you lump in all of the other Star Trek properties that I've touched, they all use science to some extent. I mean, but it's not all the same. The analogy I like using is like if you're into heavy metal music, if you tell another person you're into heavy metal, the next question is, okay, but like what kind? Because there's
Yeah,
a huge spectrum of heavy metal music. In the same way, there's a huge spectrum of science fiction, which is hard science to space fantasy. and
makes sense.
and every show lands at a different spot. Even within Star Trek, they fit different spots. I would say probably the most science dense show that I've worked on was Discovery. That was one I didn't work on season 1 and 2, but for season 3 and beyond, Michelle Paradise was very much like this is a scientific show about scientists who are sciencing and problem solving and approaching things like a scientist. And so my consulting went beyond just the technical stuff, but actually to like how do scientists think? How do they problem solve? What do they look at? What data would they need to lead them down the wrong path versus figuring out the correct answer? So there's all those little nuances to it. And I would say Discovery is probably the sciencey science one.
All right. Now, this is the question I've been begging to ask you since this whole thing started. And who exactly is Lieutenant Commander McDonald in Star Trek Prodigy? I have my
Okay.
assumptions.
Okay.
My assumption was this.
Okay.
Every video game I've ever had that had the ability to create a player, I make that character look as close to me as humanly possible with my attributes, maybe some exaggerated depending on the game, but it's me. So that's why I asked the question, who exactly is Lieutenant Commander McDonald?
uh it's me. Agreed. I Some people have postulated that it could be a descendant that just happens to look and sound exactly like me. But I reject that because I want to live in the Starfleet universe.
Okay.
So some people have postulated I could be like a Q or a traveler, just an omnitemporal chaos being, or what
Mhm.
was it, Elorian for Guinan, like a Guinan character. Just
Because
shows up everywhere.
theoretically, she would be your great, great, great grandkid, depending on the year.
Yes.
Yeah. If we took
If it was
today's date,
Yeah,
yeah,
if it was Descendants, yeah, for sure, at least. And
yeah.
um, so or time traveler, I pulled a Dr. Gillian Jacobs from the one with the whale, and at some point in the future, Star Trek, some starship is going to come and pick me up and take me into Starfleet Academy, and I'll be a professor there and teach temporal mechanics 101 and live a great life. So, but yes, it is me, and I love it.
Okay. Now I have to know this when, like, It's weird to say it like this. It's
I
like
know.
it's you in the Starfleet Academy. You're actually you. Is there any leverage points where you're like, no, I wouldn't do that, or you got to catch yourself? It's like you talk to the writers, no, I would never do that because that character is essentially me. So why would I ever do that? Or is it just
Right.
kind of like you just trust them and just roll with it?
Well, I mean, I'm pretty lucky in the sense that I'm already involved with the writers. So as opposed to like other actors who are coming in with the project, they're going to come in and they don't have any say over their character. Whereas like I was already working with the writers, and especially for the scene in Prodigy season 2 with the temporal mechanics bit, that came out of us sitting down and going, like we're planning out the whole season. It's all time travel complicated. And they all went like, oh, we need an explainer, like a Dr. DNA, Mr. DNA video from Jurassic Park. Like that's what we need. And Erin, you've been doing this for us, trying to explain time travel to us. Let's have you do it. And so that's how it happened.
Okay, I want to say this, and I don't know how this would ever happen. And I'm glad you brought up that scene. If you're explaining time to people, I'm very curious of just a conversation between Lieutenant Commander McDonald and Miss Minutes. How would that coffee meeting explaining time go? Because you guys have some different avenues on how time works. However, you do agree on some fundamental properties.
I am so delighted you brought up Miss Minutes. I love Loki so much. And we were working on this when the first season of Loki came out. And I was like, oh, I'm the TVA. I am the TVA. That's me. Like, I work for the TVA. And I mean, Miss Minutes is kind of evil, so maybe like her motivations are a little bit more corrupt than mine would be. So I might try to take her into a different approach of time travel. But the Marvel universe is a little bit less afraid of branching multiverses than we are. And I think Loki and them try to just contain them as much as possible, whereas Star Trek is like, ooh, don't mess with our universe. Like there is a prime one. We know there's other ones, but we don't need to be creating more by time travel shenanigans. So we try to make it as closed loop as possible, which I feel like we stuck the landing for season 2 of Prodigy. Like I think it's such a good time travel story.
I have to ask this question as a scientist, and I need your scientific expertise because this is more of a curiosity. I don't know if you ever did it, but have you tested the air and water in Boulder, Colorado? Because lately everything is coming out of Boulder, Colorado. It's you, Coach Crime, Shedeur Sanders. What is going on that? Not necessarily Boulder, Colorado, just that university.
Yeah, that, oh God, Boulder's such an interesting place because it's always been like there are so many national labs there. And I grew up in Colorado, and when I was looking at colleges, CU Boulder was just one that had a bunch of friends from high school that were going to. And I didn't originally want to go there at all until I went freshman year somewhere else. And I had a professor pull me aside who was like, man, you're from Colorado, you get in-state tuition and you want to study astrophysics, you need to go to Boulder. Like you need to get there. That is one of the best universities. And I had no idea. But it has a long legacy of that. It's churned out astronauts and athletes and like nobody's ever seen. I think it's the lack of air.
Okay.
And maybe some other recreational activities that float through that just expand the mind.
Makes sense.
Is a very popular pastime in Boulder. Yeah.
It is. I've heard. So I know, look, I know we're up against it. I'm looking at the time that just flew past. I know you're extremely busy and prolific with and without Star Trek. You're a writer, you're a producer, you're just everything. You literally could be an astro probe of yourself to do all of these things at once. But I gotta ask, what's next on the horizon?
I want to continue working on writing, TV writing, even writing novels. I love telling stories. I feel like my calling now is to create these characters that made me want to be a scientist and pass that along and create more stories that represent people. I fell in love with science and I wanted to be a scientist because I was a redheaded little girl watching Dana Scully and she looked like me. And the more people we can get who look like our society to be doing all sorts of fun, interesting things, that's how people see themselves on the screen and they go, hell yeah, like I want to do that. I want to be that. I can go do that. And like, I just want to keep creating those stories and telling people's, adventures. It's fun. So we'll see.
All right, well, Dr. Erin, this is awesome. Can I ask one last question? More of a favor, if anything.
Okay.
You ever cracked the code for time travel or astral projection? Could you please come back on this podcast and teach me?
Got it. I'll add you to the list.
All right, because I really need to learn how to be in two places at once.
I love it.
I
I
feel
mean, I'll
like
be a time traveler by then, so let's do it.
I feel like you already know that, but but you know, whatever. You're just like, all right, well, I got a couple of minutes. Hey, Sam, this is how you do it.
Exactly. All good. I will remember this. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Erin, this has been a treat. Thank you so much for just giving us a moment of your time. This is awesome.
Absolutely.
Smile on my face is going to have to be surgically removed. So, with that said, you have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You too. It was great meeting you.
All right. Bye.
See ya.